This property was always meant to be shared. The whole family knows it. That was my mother's sworn affidavit, written, signed, notarized, and submitted to the Franklin County Court of Common Pleas to support my younger brother's claim that the duplex I purchased 9 years ago, the duplex my grandmother co-signed, was never really mine. I sat in the courtroom and listened to those words read into the record. I didn't flinch. I didn't turn around to look at her. I kept my hands folded in my lap and my eyes on the judge, but I need to go back, because this didn't start in a courtroom. It started at my kitchen table on a Tuesday morning with a cup of coffee that had gone cold and a phone call that lasted 2 sentences. My name is Sloan Whitfield. I'm 36 years old. I've worked at Carver Ridge Dental in Columbus, Ohio for 14 years. I started there at 25, fresh out of hygiene school, and I've been a dental hygienist every day since. My salary is $72,400 a year. I also own a duplex that generates $2,100 a month in rental income, $1,050 per unit. 1 unit is mine. 1 is rented. That puts my total household income at $97,600 a year. I'm not rich. I'm not flashy. I don't take vacations. I drive a 12-year-old Honda. I keep a document safe in my hallway closet with color-coded folders. I have a spreadsheet that tracks every bill I've ever paid on behalf of someone else. And above my kitchen table, in a simple black frame, I have a letter my grandmother Dorothy wrote me on the day I closed on the duplex. It reads, "This is yours, Sloan. The first thing in this family anyone earned, honestly." She wrote that 9 years ago. She died 2 years later, and that letter has hung in the same spot every day since. I need you to understand the letter, because the letter is what Craig tried to erase. Craig is my younger brother. He's 30, 6 years younger than me. And for as long as I can remember, Craig has been the center of every room my parents have ever built. When I was 15 and made the honor roll, my mother said, "That's nice," and turned back to helping Craig with a science project he hadn't started. When I graduated high school with a 3.8 GPA, my parents threw a small dinner. When Craig graduated 4 years later with a 2.4, they rented a pavilion at the park. 40 guests, catered, a banner that said, "The future starts now." My father, Gerald, is 64, retired machinist. He's the kind of man who communicates through silence and lets that silence do whatever it wants. He never once told Craig to get a job. He never once told my mother, Maureen, to stop comparing us. He sat at the head of the table for 30 years, eyes on his plate, hands folded, and let the current carry everyone else. His silence wasn't passive, it was permission. My mother is 61. Former school secretary, now a volunteer coordinator at their church in Clintonville. She spent 2 decades building a social world, the Bridge Group, the Neighborhood Association, the church committees. She's the woman everyone calls organized, everyone calls devoted, everyone calls the backbone of the family. She's also the woman who told me when I was 25 and working double shifts to save for a down payment that it was my responsibility to start covering Craig's student loan payments. Craig was 19. He was in college. He was, according to Maureen, finding himself. His loan balance was $112,000. The monthly payment was $1,200. And my parents made it clear that Craig's future was more important than my savings timeline. I told myself it was temporary. That was 11 years ago. I paid $1,200 every single month for 132 months. That's $158,400. I paid beyond the principal. I covered the interest that accumulated while Craig was in deferment. I set up automatic transfers so I wouldn't have to think about it. And Craig never acknowledged a single payment, not once, not a thank you, not a text, nothing. But the loans weren't all. There were 2 emergency wire transfers when Craig was managing a bar downtown and came up short on the register. The first was $1,900. The second, 4 months later, was $1,500. He called both times at night, panicked, saying he'd lose his job if he didn't cover the difference by morning. I sent the money. He lost the job anyway, terminated for cash register shortfalls. There was the time his car registration lapsed and his insurance flagged him. I paid $847 to clear it because Maureen called and said, "He can't get to interviews without a car loan." Grand total, $162,647 over 11 years. Exposed on my spreadsheet in neat columns with dates, confirmation numbers, and transfer receipts, every dollar documented. every dollar unacknowledged, and during those same 11 years, I was saving. Quietly, methodically, working my shifts at Carver Ridge, picking up Saturday cleanings when they were available, packing lunches, skipping anything that wasn't necessary. By the time I was 27, I had enough for a down payment. I found the duplex listed at $198,000, 2 units, solid bones, a neighborhood where the numbers made sense. The rental income would cover the mortgage and then some. I ran the math 14 times before I called my grandmother. Dorothy Whitfield was 71 when I asked her to co-sign. She didn't hesitate. She didn't ask me to explain the investment. She didn't lecture me about risk. She said, "Show me where to sign." My parents did not attend the closing. Craig was not mentioned. It was Dorothy and me at a table in a title office on a Wednesday afternoon. She signed the co-signer line. I signed the deed. And when the paperwork was done and the keys were in my hand, she reached into her purse and pulled out a folded piece of paper. The letter. Her handwriting was small and careful, blue ink, the kind of penmanship they taught in schools that don't exist anymore. "This is yours, Sloan. The first thing in this family anyone earned honestly." I framed it that evening. It went above the kitchen table. It has not moved. Dorothy died 2 years later. I was 29. The funeral was small, family only. Craig attended and spent most of the reception near the food table, laughing with a cousin. At one point, I heard him say, and I will never forget the casual weight of it, "Maybe now we can finally do something with that old place." He meant the duplex. I didn't respond. I didn't look at him. That night, after the house was quiet, I opened my document safe, placed the original notarized deed inside next to my copy of Dorothy's co-signature page, and closed it. I kept paying Craig's loans. I kept maintaining the duplex. I kept showing up to Carver Ridge at 7:45 every morning. And I kept telling myself that family was just like this. Uneven, complicated, hard. That if I kept giving, eventually the giving would be enough. It was never enough. 2 years before everything broke open, my attorney, Patricia Cook, called me about an unrelated matter, a lease renewal for my rental unit. Patricia had represented me since the original duplex purchase. She knew the property. She knew the deed. And at the end of that call, almost as an aside, she said something that would turn out to matter more than anything else she ever told me. "Sloan, I've been seeing a pattern in the metro area, deed fraud targeting single ownership properties with no active liens. You fit the profile. I'd recommend placing a proactive fraud alert with the Franklin County Recorder's Office. It's simple. Takes 15 minutes. I filed the alert. I thought nothing more of it. That was 2 years before Craig walked into the Franklin County Recorder's Office with a forged co-ownership amendment and my name signed in a handwriting that wasn't mine. The alert sat in the system like a tripwire in tall grass, invisible, patient, waiting for someone to step on it. And then, 11 months ago, Craig got fired from his bar management job. The register shortfalls caught up with him. He walked out with no severance, no reference, and no plan. Within weeks, he had a plan. The Harrison Draft House, a sports bar, Craig's vision, Craig's dream, Craig's name on the concept. He needed capital. He went to Gerald and Maureen first. They had nothing. A machinist's pension and a school secretary's retirement don't stretch to cover a startup. Gerald, according to what I pieced together later, said 5 words that set everything in motion. Talk to Sloan about the duplex. Craig did not talk to me. Instead, he went to the Franklin County Recorder's Office and filed a co-ownership amendment to my duplex deed. The document claimed that Craig Whitfield had been added as co-owner at the time of purchase. It carried a signature that was supposed to be mine. It wasn't mine. Then he took that forged document to a lender and applied for a $134,000 mortgage, secured against the duplex, against my property, against the building Dorothy co-signed, against the walls I'd maintained for 9 years with my own hands and my own income. He did all of this without saying a word to me, but he didn't know about the fraud alert. On a Tuesday morning, at exactly 9:14 a.m., my phone buzzed on the kitchen table. I was sitting with my coffee. The framed letter was above me where it always was. The screen showed a 614 area code I didn't recognize. I picked up. A woman named Sandra Bell, a clerk at the Franklin County Recorder's Office, spoke 2 sentences. She said a co-ownership amendment had been filed on my property. She said the fraud alert in my file had flagged the filing and suspended processing. 2 sentences. She changed everything. I sat at that table for a long time after the call ended. The coffee was cold. The house was quiet except for the furnace clicking on. Dorothy's letter hung above me in its black frame, the blue ink as steady as the day she wrote it. I called Patricia Cook at 9:22 a.m., and then Craig made it worse. When the mortgage application was suspended pending investigation, Craig didn't retreat. He didn't apologize. He didn't call me. He filed a partition lawsuit in the Franklin County Court of Common Pleas to force a sale of the duplex. His argument: the property was always intended to be co-owned, and he was entitled to his share. Then he submitted fabricated text message screenshots, messages that had never existed, claiming they proved I had made a verbal co-ownership agreement years earlier. And then Gerald and Maureen signed sworn affidavits, both of them, separately, notarized, submitted to the court, corroborating Craig's story, stating under oath that the duplex was always meant to be shared. My father signed his name to a lie. My mother signed her name to a lie, to take from me the one thing Dorothy said I had earned honestly. If you've ever had the people who were supposed to protect you sign their name against you instead, hit that like button and subscribe. I sat at the kitchen table the night I found out about the affidavits. The house was dark except for the light above the stove. Dorothy's letter was a pale rectangle on the wall above me. I didn't read it. I didn't need to. I had memorized every word 9 years ago. Something inside me shifted. Not loud, not dramatic, just a clean, quiet break, like a bone setting itself back into place after being wrong for a very long time. I was done pretending this was how family worked. The quiet wasn't heavy anymore. It was sharp. It was clear. I sat at that kitchen table for another 40 minutes. I didn't move. I didn't cry. I didn't call anyone. I just let the clarity settle the way sediment drops to the bottom of still water, and what's left on top is transparent. I thought about the $158,400 in student loan payments. I thought about the $1,900 wire transfer and the $1,500 wire transfer and the $847 for the car registration. I thought about the 132 months of automatic transfers that Craig never once acknowledged. I thought about Dorothy sitting across from me at the title office, her signature on the co-signer line, the folded letter she pulled from her purse with hands that were already starting to tremble. And I thought about my mother's affidavit, the words she chose, always meant to be shared, sworn, notarized, filed with the court. I looked up at the letter, blue ink, careful handwriting. This is yours, Sloan? I picked up my phone, not fast, not frantic. I opened my contacts, found Patricia Cook's number, and typed one text message. 6 words. I'm ready to fight this now. She responded in under a minute. I've been waiting for you to say that. My office, Thursday at 9. I set the phone down. I turned off the kitchen light. I went to bed and slept straight through until my alarm. The next 4 months were not dramatic. They were administrative, and that's what made them lethal. Patricia Cook had already begun assembling the response to Craig's partition lawsuit the week after Sandra Bell's call. But my text changed the scope. I wasn't just defending the property anymore. I was building a record that would make every lie they told visible, permanent, and consequential. The first thing Patricia did was subpoena the original deed from the Franklin County Recorder's Office. The one Dorothy co-signed 9 years ago, notarized, time-stamped. My signature in my handwriting, Dorothy's signature in hers. No co-ownership amendment. No mention of Craig Whitfield anywhere on the document. The second thing she did was request the fraud alert filing, the one I'd placed 2 years earlier on her advice. The timestamp on that alert predated Craig's forged amendment by 23 months. It showed I had taken a protective legal step long before Craig made his move, not in response to him, not because I suspected him, but because I was the kind of person who locked doors before anyone tried to open them. The third thing she did was commission a forensic handwriting analysis. She sent the analyst 3 documents: the forged co-ownership amendment bearing a signature that claimed to be mine, my actual signature from the original deed, and a sample of Craig's handwriting pulled from his mortgage application. The report came back in 6 weeks. The signature on the forged amendment did not match my known samples. It was, in the analyst's phrasing, consistent with the handwriting characteristics of Craig A. Whitfield. The fourth thing Patricia did was pull the fabricated text message screenshots Craig had submitted to the court. She had a digital forensics consultant examine the metadata. The timestamps on the screenshots were inconsistent with my phone's operating system version during the period Craig claimed the messages were sent. The font rendering didn't match. The thread formatting was wrong. Craig hadn't just forged a deed, he'd forged a conversation. And the fifth piece, the one that mattered most to me, was Dorothy's letter. Patricia asked if I would allow it to be entered into evidence. Not a copy. The original. I took it down from the wall, slid it out of the frame carefully, and placed it in a clear document sleeve. I handed it to Patricia across her desk. She looked at the handwriting for a long time. "This is yours, Sloan. The first thing in this family anyone earned honestly." Patricia set it down gently. "This goes in the packet last," she said. "After the forensics, after the fraud alert, after the deed. The judge reads this one with everything else already in front of him." I nodded. I understood. You build the math first. Then you show the meaning. The hearing was on a Wednesday. Month 5. The Franklin County Court of Common Pleas, a courtroom that smelled like floor wax and old paper. Craig's partition lawsuit. His attorney, a man named David Harris, who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, sat at the other table. Craig was next to him in a navy suit that didn't quite fit. He'd lost weight. His jaw was tight. Gerald and Maureen sat in the gallery behind Craig. My father wore a gray sport coat. My mother wore the cream blouse she always wore to church. They didn't look at me. I didn't look at them. I sat next to Patricia Cook. My hands were folded in my lap. My breathing was even. I had nothing to prove that the documents wouldn't prove for me. Patricia presented the evidence in sequence. She didn't rush. She didn't raise her voice. She laid each document in front of the judge the way you lay bricks. Level, square, permanent. First, the notarized original deed. Dated 9 years prior, signed by Sloan Whitfield and co-signed by Dorothy Whitfield. No co-ownership provision, no mention of Craig. When the judge looked up from the document, I said the only thing I needed to say. My grandmother co-signed that deed. She wrote a letter on closing day. I've kept it above my kitchen table for 9 years. It's in the packet. Second, the fraud alert filing from the Franklin County Recorder's Office. Dated 23 months before Craig's forged amendment. Filed on the advice of counsel as a proactive measure. Sandra Bell's contemporaneous documentation of the flagged filing attached. Third, the forensic handwriting analysis, 12 pages. Comparison charts. The conclusion printed in clear clinical language. The signature on the co-ownership amendment was not consistent with Sloan Whitfield's known handwriting. It was consistent with Craig Whitfield's. Fourth, the digital forensics report on the fabricated text message screenshots. Metadata inconsistencies, font discrepancies, operating system mismatches. The messages Craig claimed proved a verbal co-ownership agreement had never existed on my phone. They'd been manufactured. And fifth, Patricia placed Dorothy's letter in front of the judge, the clear document sleeve, the blue ink, the careful handwriting. "This is yours, Sloan. The first thing in this family anyone earned honestly." The judge read it. He read it again. He set it down. The room was silent, not the dramatic silence of a movie courtroom, the administrative silence of a place where numbers and documents do the talking and there is nothing left to argue. Craig's attorney attempted a response. He referenced the affidavits from Gerald and Maureen. He repeated the phrase family understanding 3 times. He suggested the forensic analysis was inconclusive. Patricia stood. She didn't raise her voice. She said, "Your Honor, the original deed is notarized and unambiguous. The fraud alert predates the contested filing by 23 months. The forensic analysis is not inconclusive. It identifies the respondent's handwriting on a forged instrument, and the text messages submitted as evidence were digitally fabricated. The affidavits from Gerald and Maureen Whitfield directly contradict the documentary record and the co-signer's own written statement. I would ask the court to note that those affidavits were sworn under penalty of perjury." She sat down. She didn't add anything. She didn't need to. The judge reviewed the full packet for 11 minutes. I counted. Craig stared at the table in front of him. Gerald stared at the floor. Maureen's hands were clasped so tightly in her lap that her knuckles had gone white. The ruling came in 4 parts. First, the partition lawsuit was dismissed. The property belonged solely to Sloan Whitfield. There was no co-ownership interest to partition. Second, sanctions of $8,700 were ordered against Craig for filing a frivolous and fraudulent claim. Third, the forged co-ownership amendment was referred to the Franklin County prosecutor for criminal investigation under Ohio Revised Code. Section 2, 913.31, forgery. The judge noted that the evidence presented was sufficient to support a referral and that the forged instrument had been used in an attempt to secure a $134,000 mortgage against a property the respondent had no legal interest in. Fourth, The sworn affidavits of Gerald and Maureen Whitfield were ordered forwarded to the Franklin County Prosecutor's Office for review as potential perjury. The judge said the word perjury the same way he said every other word, flat. Procedural, like entering a line item into a ledger. Maureen made a sound behind me. Not a word, not a gasp. Something between the two, caught in her throat and held there. Gerald said nothing. His silence, for once, was not permission. It was the sound of a man realizing that the thing he had permitted had finally arrived at his door. Craig didn't move. His attorney leaned over and whispered something. Craig's jaw worked, but nothing came out. I stood when Patricia stood. I gathered the document sleeve with Dorothy's letter carefully. I walked out of the courtroom without looking back. In the hallway, Craig caught up to me. His footsteps were fast, uneven. He stopped 3 feet away. His face was drawn. The performance was gone. "You set this up," he said. Not a question. "You knew I'd try." I stopped walking. I turned. I kept my voice level. "I placed a fraud alert on my own property. That's not a trap. That's a lock." He stared at me. His mouth opened, then closed. I turned back around and walked to the elevator. Patricia walked beside me. Neither of us spoke until we reached the parking garage. 2 days later, my doorbell rang at 7:40 in the evening. I was at the kitchen table. Dorothy's letter was back in its frame, back on the wall, exactly where it had been for 9 years. I looked through the peephole. Craig, shirt untucked, eyes red-rimmed, stubble that wasn't a style choice. It was neglect. Behind him, at the curb, Gerald's car was idling. Maureen was in the passenger seat, staring straight ahead through the windshield. I opened the door. I kept my hand on the frame. I didn't step aside. "Sloan." His voice cracked on the second syllable. "You're going to let them charge me over a signature." I looked at him. I felt nothing, not anger, not pity, nothing. "I'm not letting them do anything, Craig. I placed a fraud alert 2 years ago. You filed a forged deed. Those two facts met each other. It was supposed to be a formality. The family always what?" I said. Quiet. Even. "Took what I earned? Called it sharing? I paid $158,400 in student loans for you, 11 years. You never said thank you once, and then you forged my name on my property to take a $134,000 mortgage for a bar." He blinked. I don't think he knew the total. I don't think he'd ever calculated what I'd given him, because he'd never considered it a gift. He'd considered it gravity, something that just happened, that flowed downhill toward him, because that was the natural direction of things. "Mom and Dad, they said the duplex was always—" "Dorothy co-signed that deed," I said. "She wrote a letter on closing day. I've kept it above my kitchen table for 9 years. Your affidavit said the property was always meant to be shared. Dorothy's letter says it was mine." The judge agreed. Craig's eyes went to the ground. His hands hung at his sides. For a moment, he looked 19 again. The same age he was when I started paying his loans, when the family decided his future mattered more than mine. "I need help, Sloan." "I know you do," I said, "but not from me. Not anymore." He stood there. 5 seconds. 10. Then he turned and walked down the porch steps, slowly, like a man leaving a building he knew he'd never enter again. Gerald's car pulled away from the curb. Maureen never turned her head. I stepped back inside. The door closed softly. No slam. Just the quiet click of the lock sliding into place. I walked to the kitchen table. I sat down. Dorothy's letter was above me, blue ink on white paper, 9 years steady. I opened my phone. I went through my contacts methodically. I blocked Craig's number. I blocked Gerald's number. I blocked Maureen's number. I removed myself from the family group text. I deleted the thread without rereading it. I opened my email, found every message from a Whitfield address, selected all, and archived them unread. I didn't do it in anger. I did it in clarity. Then I set the phone face down on the table and sat in the quiet house, the furnace clicking softly, the streetlight cutting through the blinds, and I breathed. For the first time in 11 years, the silence in that house was mine. The weeks after the hearing moved the way water moves through limestone, slow, invisible, and permanent. I didn't seek updates. I didn't ask Patricia Cook to monitor Craig's case. I didn't drive through Clintonville to see if Gerald and Maureen's car was in the driveway. I didn't check social media because I had never been on social media. I went to Carver Ridge Dental at 7:45 every morning. I came home. I collected rent on the 1st of the month. I sat at the kitchen table in the evenings with the letter above me and the quiet around me, and I let the silence be exactly what it was. Mine. but information travels in a city like Columbus the way heat travels through a wall. You don't see it move, but you feel it arrive. And what arrived, over the months that followed, came through the dental practice receptionist who went to the same church as Maureen, through Patricia Cook's paralegal who lived 2 streets over from Gerald and Maureen in Clintonville, through the property tax records that are public in Franklin County, through the quiet, persistent machinery of a community that notices when the people who position themselves at its center suddenly can't meet anyone's eyes. 3 weeks after the hearing, Craig moved back into Gerald and Maureen's house. The Harrison Draft House was dead. The concept, the name, the vision, all of it required capital Craig would never have, from lenders who would never return his calls. The $134,000 mortgage application had been permanently denied. His credit report now carried the suspended application, the fraud flag, and the pending criminal referral. Background checks told the whole story in a single page. He was 30 years old, sleeping in his childhood bedroom, facing criminal forgery charges under Ohio Revised Code, Section 2913.31. The potential sentence was up to 18 months. Gerald and Maureen's world contracted on a different timeline, not in weeks, but in the specific measured intervals of a community, deciding without a meeting, without a vote, that certain people are no longer welcome. 8 weeks after the hearing, Maureen's volunteer coordinator role at the Clintonville church was reassigned. The pastor didn't use the word removed. He used the phrase transition period and suggested Maureen step back to focus on family matters. She had held that position for 6 years. The conversation lasted 4 minutes. She walked out of the church office and sat in her car in the parking lot for 45 minutes before driving home. The affidavits were the mechanism, not the forgery. That was Craig's crime, Craig's name, Craig's signature on a fraudulent document. But the affidavits were Gerald and Maureen's own handwriting, their own names, their own sworn statements submitted to a court of law, and the judge had forwarded them to the Franklin County prosecutor with a notation about potential perjury. That forwarding was not a secret. Court filings are public. And in a neighborhood like Clintonville, where Gerald helped found the neighborhood association and Maureen organized the annual block party, and both of them had spent 2 decades building the kind of social architecture that depends entirely on trust, the word perjury did not need to be spoken loudly to be heard by everyone. 4 months after the hearing, the bridge group dropped Gerald and Maureen from the rotation. No formal notice. The Tuesday evening invitations simply stopped arriving. Maureen called the host, a woman named Janet Taylor she'd played with for 11 years. Janet was polite. Janet was brief. Janet said the group had decided to scale back to 6 players. There were 8 in the rotation. Maureen was not one of the 6. She called a second member. The call went to voicemail. She called a third. The phone rang and rang. She stopped calling. 6 months after the hearing, Gerald stopped attending the monthly neighborhood association meetings he had helped found. He'd been a charter member. His name was on the original bylaws, but the last meeting he attended, he sat in the back row, and not one person approached him before it started. Not one person spoke to him during the break. He picked up his coat at the halfway point and left through the side door. He did not return the following month, or the month after that. The neighbors who had known them for 20 years, the ones who borrowed Gerald's leaf blower in October, the ones who brought Maureen casseroles when she had knee surgery, the ones who waved from driveways and chatted over fences. Those neighbors did not stop being polite. They stopped being present. The waves became nods. The nods became glances. The glances became the particular kind of absence that looks like a person turning to check their mailbox at the exact moment you step onto your porch. Maureen and Gerald were not arrested. They were not charged. The prosecutor's office had their affidavits under review, and by the end of the story, I'm telling you, no outcome had been reached. But the review itself was known. And in a community built on the currency of reputation, the review was enough. They couldn't walk into their own church without whispers following them down the aisle. Not cruel whispers, not dramatic ones. The quiet kind, the kind that stop when you get close and start again when you pass. 10 months after the hearing, Craig's criminal case was proceeding through the Franklin County system. No trial date had been set. His public defender had filed for continuances twice. Craig was not in jail. He was in his parents' house, In the bedroom he'd grown up in, with no job, no prospects, and a legal process, grinding forward at the speed court's grind. The sports bar, the forged deed, the $134,000 mortgage against a property he never owned, the fabricated text messages, the partition lawsuit dismissed with $8,700 in sanctions he couldn't pay. All of it had collapsed into the single, narrow corridor of a criminal docket number and a life that fit inside his childhood bedroom. I learned these things the way you learn weather. It drifts in. You don't chase it. Patricia Cook mentioned the criminal case timeline during a routine call about my lease renewal. The receptionist at Carver Ridge mentioned the church reassignment while we were restocking the supply room. A neighbor of mine, who knew a neighbor of Gerald's, mentioned the association meetings over the back fence one Saturday while I was pulling weeds. I didn't ask follow-up questions. I didn't feel satisfaction. I felt the same thing I'd felt the night I blocked their numbers. Clarity, the clean, weightless feeling of a ledger that has been balanced and closed. 1 year after the hearing, on a Saturday morning in early October, I sat at the kitchen table with coffee that was still warm. The furnace hadn't kicked on yet. The windows were open. The air smelled like cut grass and the first dry edge of autumn. Dorothy's letter hung above me, blue ink on white paper. The black frame I'd bought at a hardware store 9 years ago, the day I closed on the duplex. This is yours, Sloan. The first thing in this family anyone earned honestly. The duplex was worth $312,000. My mortgage payment was $1,340 a month, paid on time every month for 9 years. My tenant's rent deposited on the first, $1,050 steady as a heartbeat. My savings account held $41,300. My salary at Carver Ridge was $72,400. My total household income was $97,600 a year. I owned every dollar of it. Every square foot of it, every document in the safe in my hallway closet, every color-coded folder. The spreadsheet still existed. The one that tracked $162,647 in payments made on behalf of people who never said thank you. I hadn't deleted it. I hadn't printed it. I hadn't looked at it since the hearing. It sat in a folder on my laptop labeled closed, and that's where it would stay. I didn't call Gerald or Maureen. I didn't monitor Craig's case. I didn't wonder what they were eating for dinner or whether the house in Clintonville felt empty or whether Maureen still set the table for bridge on Tuesdays, out of habit. I slept through the night. I woke without dread. I drove my 12-year-old Honda to work, and I came home to a house that was quiet in the way quiet is supposed to feel. Not like absence, but like enough. On that Saturday morning, I looked up at the letter one more time. I didn't read the words. I didn't need to. I had known them by heart since the afternoon Dorothy pulled that folded piece of paper from her purse with trembling hands and placed it on the title office table next to the keys. She was the only one in this family who ever said it out loud. I just made sure the record agreed. The cut was clean. If you enjoyed this story about protecting what you've earned and refusing to let anyone rewrite your history, hit that like button and let me know what you think in the comments. And if you haven't subscribed yet, make sure to subscribe and ring that notification bell for more stories just like this one. Thanks for watching.